Hungary in the mid-16th century stood at a crossroads between two worlds: the fading might of the Holy Roman Empire and the creeping shadow of the Ottoman Turks. Between these giants lay a nation divided, ruled by kings who wore crowns not of honor but of compromise. The peasants toiled under crushing taxes, and the nobles whispered of lost freedoms. In the markets of Buda and the taverns of Pest, a quiet storm began to gather. King Ferdinand I ruled with an iron hand, his policies designed to strengthen loyalty to the Habsburg throne. Yet loyalty born of fear is fragile. The landless peasants and disillusioned soldiers returning from endless wars began to murmur of rebellion. The fires of dissent were lit not in castles, but in the humble homes of men who had nothing left to lose. Among them rose one name, Gyorgy Dozsa, a soldier who had once fought for the crown but now sought to challenge it. Dozsa's fame spread across the plains like a wildfire. A knight of common birth, he was admired for his courage, yet despised by nobles for his defiance. His speeches in the countryside stirred thousands. He promised freedom from taxes, the right to land, and justice denied by the lords. What began as a crusade against the Turks soon transformed into a rebellion against the Hungarian crown itself. As spring turned to summer, farmers abandoned their plows and took up arms. Monks blessed their cause, calling it divine justice. In towns like Szeged and Segled, villagers declared their allegiance to Dozsa, carving his name onto church doors. The king's messengers who came demanding loyalty were sent back beaten, if they returned at all. The nobles, alarmed by the speed of the uprising, pleaded with King Ferdinand for reinforcements. Yet the king, confident in his power, dismissed the rebellion as a peasant tantrum. He underestimated the fury of the starving and the power of desperation. As the rebel forces swelled to tens of thousands, even trained soldiers began to waver in their loyalty. Dozsa's army marched under a banner of the Virgin Mary, claiming divine authority. They stormed small fortresses, burned manorial estates, and executed nobles who refused to join their cause. The rebellion spread across the great Hungarian plain like a plague. By June, the kingdom trembled. In secret halls, the royal court debated the punishment for treason. Some urged negotiation, others demanded annihilation. The Archbishop of Esztergom, a fierce loyalist, insisted that rebellion against the king was rebellion against God. It was he who proposed the cruelest of all sentences, a punishment that would forever remind traitors of the sanctity of the crown. A crown of hot iron, forged in the royal smithy to be placed upon the heads of those who dared to wear authority not granted by the king. As the fires of rebellion burned bright, the plan was forged in the darkness of the palace forge. The ironworkers shaped the mock crown, its edges jagged, its inside lined with tiny spikes to ensure no flesh escaped unscorched. The king's inquisitors watched in silence as molten metal poured into the mold, glowing red and humming with heat. By midsummer, the royal army finally moved. Thousands of mounted knights rode across the plains, their armor glinting in the sun, crushing resistance village by village. The peasant army, brave but undisciplined, could not stand against trained cavalry. Blood ran through the fields that once fed the nation. Smoke rose from every village that had sworn loyalty to Dozsa. Captured rebels were paraded in chains through towns as examples of royal justice. The king's decree was read aloud. "Let no man forget, he who dares to crown himself in rebellion shall wear a crown of flame." The words carried across Hungary, striking terror into those who still dared whisper the rebel's name. Dozsa and his closest followers made their last stand near Temesvár. Outnumbered and betrayed, they fought until their weapons broke. The royal banners soon replaced the peasant flags, and silence fell over the plains. Dozsa, wounded and defiant, was dragged before the commander of the royal forces, a noble who once fought beside him in foreign wars. His fate was already sealed. The forge was prepared. The executioners awaited the king's word. Dozsa, bloodied but unbowed, stared at the distant horizon where the sun sank behind the fields he had fought for. Around him stood hundreds of captured peasants, witnesses to what happens when men rise against the crown. The rebellion had been crushed, but the punishment was yet to begin. The crown of iron, still glowing in the forge, waited for its bearer. Its heat shimmered in the air like the breath of hell itself. The guards whispered prayers under their breath, for even they felt the horror of what was to come. In the royal camp, wine flowed as nobles celebrated victory, but outside the air reeked of death and smoke. The executioner sharpened his tools and wiped sweat from his brow. He had burned men before, but never crowned one. The order was clear. The traitor who dared to call himself king would be crowned with fire. As night fell, Dozsa was dragged to the courtyard, chains clinking against the stone. Torches flared, casting his shadow across the ground. He did not kneel. Even facing death, he stood straight, his eyes locked on the iron crown glowing in the darkness. The nobles watched from their tents, faces lit by firelight, murmuring in awe and fear. Somewhere far away the bells of Buda rang for vespers. The kingdom had been saved, they said, but the price of its order would be written in screams. And as the blacksmith raised the tongs toward the glowing crown, the air went still. The rebellion's fire had been extinguished, but another, far crueler, far more deliberate, was about to be lit. The courtyard of Temesvár fortress was filled with the hum of whispers and the crackle of torches. The air was heavy with heat and the stench of blood. Captured rebels, bound in chains, were forced to watch what their uprising had brought. Above them, nobles stood in silence, their silken garments fluttering in the night wind, their eyes fixed on the man who had defied a king. Gyorgy Dozsa knelt only when the guards forced him down. His body bore the marks of battle, bruises, burns, and the deep gash across his arm where a sword had grazed him in his final fight. Yet his gaze remained calm, his lips twisted in a defiant smile. Around him the cries of his comrades echoed, but he did not flinch. The rebels had been promised freedom. Now they awaited death. From the blackened forge, 2 soldiers carried the object that had haunted the camp since dawn, the iron crown. It glowed with a dull red light, the metal shimmering with molten heat. Tiny sparks fell from it like embers, hissing as they touched the damp ground. The crowd fell silent. Even the horses nearby stirred uneasily, sensing the cruelty that was about to unfold. The royal executioner stepped forward, his hands steady but pale. He had been given strict instructions, no mercy, no hesitation. The crown must be placed upon Dozsa's head while still blazing. The punishment, decreed by royal command and sanctified by the church, would symbolize the destruction of false kingship. The peasant who dared to crown himself leader would now wear a crown forged from hellfire. The blacksmith brought the crown closer, using long iron tongs. The air shimmered with heat. Dozsa's skin glistened with sweat as the warmth reached his face. "Do it," he muttered, voice low but firm. "Let your king see what courage looks like." The executioner hesitated only for a moment, then pressed the burning crown down upon his head. The sound that followed was unlike anything the human ear was meant to hear, a hiss, a crackle, and a scream that tore through the courtyard like thunder. The molten iron seared through flesh and hair, fusing with skin, burning deep into bone. The smell of charred flesh filled the air. Dozsa's head jerked back, his body convulsing as steam rose from his skull. The nobles recoiled, some covering their faces, others forcing themselves to watch. The iron crown hissed as it cooled against his skull, embedding itself into him like a grotesque symbol of defiance. His cries grew hoarse, then ceased, replaced by ragged breaths. He did not die instantly. That was part of the punishment. The crown was meant to torture, not kill. The king's message was clear. Rebellion was to be erased through suffering, not silence. When his screams subsided, the commander of the royal army approached. "Behold your king," he declared to the crowd, his voice carrying over the flames. "He wore a crown of rebellion. Now he wears the true one." The soldiers forced Dozsa onto a throne made of iron spikes, built hastily for the execution. Around him, they placed several of his captured lieutenants. They were ordered to serve him one last time, to tear pieces of flesh from his body and eat them, or face the same death. The rebels, broken and starved, trembled in terror. None dared move. One young man, barely 17, whispered a prayer before collapsing to his knees. The guards dragged him up, shoved a red-hot piece of metal into his hand, and forced him toward Dozsa. He wept as he obeyed, his tears hissing as they struck the glowing crown. Dozsa looked at him through half-burned eyes and whispered, "Do not cry for me. Cry for Hungary." The words hung in the air, quiet but eternal. As dawn approached, the once proud general was unrecognizable. His skin blackened, his face hidden beneath the melted metal that fused into his skull. The executioners waited for him to fall silent, but still he breathed. Even as his body failed him, his will refused to break. The soldiers began to chant psalms to drown the sound of agony, but it was no use. Every man in the courtyard felt the weight of what he was witnessing. Even the most hardened of nobles turned away, muttering that this punishment went beyond justice. But the churchmen called it divine will, the fire of righteousness consuming the sinner. The sun rose slowly over the fortress walls, its first light striking the iron crown still smoking on Dozsa's head. Crows circled above, drawn by the scent of blood. In the distance, villagers who had been spared gathered on the hills to watch, their faces pale with horror. Mothers held their children close, whispering warnings that would be told for generations: never rise against the king. When Dozsa's final breath left him, a strange stillness fell over the camp. The commander nodded, signaling the end. The executioner stepped forward to remove the crown, but it would not come off. It had fused entirely with the bone beneath. They left it there, a permanent mark of royal vengeance. The crown was later displayed in the capital as a warning, hung above the city gates. Travelers from across the empire stopped to stare at it, a crude iron band, blackened with blood and soot. Beneath it a plaque read, "Here lies the fate of false kings." But though his body perished, Dozsa's legend began that very day. In whispers and songs, peasants began to call him the man of fire, the martyr of the plains. His rebellion had been crushed, but his defiance became the spark for every future uprising. That night, as the soldiers celebrated victory in the fortress hall, a storm gathered outside. Thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning struck the courtyard where Dozsa had died. The iron crown glimmered faintly under the rain, as if refusing to cool. Some said it was the fire of rebellion that would never die. Others said it was the curse of a man who had been crowned in pain, but remembered in pride. And in the darkness, Hungary slept uneasy, for though the crown of fire had silenced one voice, it had awakened the conscience of a nation.